I just have to start off. I'm a little under the weather, so I'm not going to be my like dynamic, amazing self when it comes to energy and passion. And also, no, I might have to mute myself because I have this very irritating cough. But hopefully, I'll be okay. And I just there are no words for how honored I was to do Rebecca Case's book, Polyvagal Informed EMDR, and I thought, I'm just going to pick books of people that really changed my life and who have really moved me. And so Frank Andersen is one of them. I've been trying to read this book for years. And then also the Stephen and Seth Porges as a combined authors for Polyvagal World. And so those are going to be our two books going into the fall. So with transcending trauma, though, the key to this for me, because I do teach in an advanced training and I've been teaching ego states forever. And so the key is how do we integrate internal family systems into complex trauma? Because that's like a different ball game. And so once again, picked up this book and it just really nailed it. So this is going to be a journey that we're going to be on together in that it's this kind of takes me, I got to be honest, a little out of my comfort zone because I'm an EMDR basic trainer and there's nothing about EMDR here. Maybe a page, a sentence or two on what works and what doesn't. But yeah, let's just jump right in. First I'd like to start with knowing if there's anybody here that's not EMDR trained. You're trauma informed, but not EMDR trained, because if we're looking to make this an open group for everybody, for those that really want to start learning how to become trauma informed. Maybe you're already trauma informed, but I just want to get an idea of what the EMDR group looks like.
You all can put things right in the chat too, if that's easier.
Yeah, Nina.
Yeah, I'm IFS trained, but I'm not EMDR trained.
Perfect. That's the kind of thing I'm asking. Yep, great. Great. Okay. Anything else, Laura?
We have kind of a mix. We've only heard from about 7 people. It looks like it's a pretty 50-50.
Okay, good. That's what I want to hear. Okay. All right. And just know that, Laura, just so you know, whenever somebody comes into the room, it does show up on my screen where the slideshow is. So that's going to be that rectangle we're going to see. Okay, let's jump in. All right, healing complex trauma, complex PTSD with internal family systems. Frank Andersen, he's amazing. He's now very focused on his trauma story. This is a book that he wrote years ago, and now he's on to another book, and he's kind of on to new topics. But at the end of the day, if you're looking to do internal family systems, if you're looking to work with internal family systems, then Frank is the way to go. I'm going to be doing some comparing of ego states and parts work with IFS as we go along, because at the end of the day, it's all the same thing. It's just different language, so that we can kind of keep up with what we're seeing out there when we're doing our own research and reading articles, etc. So Frank's known for this statement of trauma blocks love and love heals trauma. He says trauma blocks love, connection, and creativity. And in return, love has the power to transcend trauma, heal us, reconnect us to ourself, our soul, our source, and to each other. I think one of the beautiful things that I'm really appreciating about IFS so far is this piece around this higher self. The higher self, I'm going on a pilgrimage in a couple of weeks. And so my higher self, my soul is involved. Different people have different ways of experiencing life. And so I think that having this higher self can look different for everybody. And it's a really beautiful place. And I love that when we talk about higher self, that we talk about how it's always been there. And it's not something that we have to create. I know that with the trauma work that we do, with the EMDR, a lot of times we feel like we need to strengthen and enhance positive neural networks because there aren't any, or our clients are phobic to them. But here, this is there, and it's just a matter of finding it and giving it the strength to show up, and that would be that self piece. And then this is Frank talking about that. assuming that I can get him.
I had been doing psychopharmacology. I had been doing psychopharmacology conferences for Bessel for years. And then he invited this guy, Dick Schwartz. And I said, okay, let me go to this day-long workshop. And so that was the first time I really met Dick Schwartz. And it was one of those like Oprah aha moments, right? When I saw Dick Schwartz talking about how he worked with trauma, it was a game changer for me. And the pieces that were really interesting, IFS or internal family systems, was this. Dick Schwartz talked about getting parts out of the past and having them totally heal, release, and let go of everything they were carrying. That was really new for me. So I had been working with parts for a long time. I had been trained with EMDR. I had been trained in sensory motor psychotherapy, but Dick Schwartz, the founder of IFS, really talked about something different as it relates to healing, like taking parts out of the past and permanent healing. So I got super excited. I got super jazzed about it, and I dove into IFS full force. So I went level 1, level 2, level 3, and then at some point, Dick and I became friends. He asked me to do a trauma training for internal family systems because they hadn't had trauma-specific trainings at that point. So that's a little bit of my history and how I kind of got into the trauma field itself, and then how I got into internal family systems. So today we're going to be talking about associations of IFS and healing. So this is not an IFS course per se, but we are going to use some of the key principles about internal family systems, but we're going to really expand healing here. And I am, again, super excited to be able to do this because this is something that I don't get a chance to talk about that much. We're going to be talking about energy. We're going to be talking about self-energy, what we have, our inherent wisdom within. We're also going to be talking about spirituality. And oftentimes, a lot of these conferences that I do, let's not talk about spirituality, Frank. That's kind of weird. That's a little woo-woo, right? But I'm so thrilled to be able to be talking about that stuff here because in my experience, you have to deal with energy, you have to deal with the self, and often you deal with spirituality, whatever that means to you, as it relates to healing trauma. We're also going to be talking about the ways energy gets blocked, the way trauma is so difficult to heal because there are a lot of things that block access to healing. So that is some of what we'll be talking about throughout the course of our time together. And I'm super excited for you and I to be on this journey together. So why don't we begin?
Okay. And so I thought that was a cute video because at the end of the day,
I had been doing psychopharmacology.
Yeah.
We need to interrupt. There are several folks that weren't able to hear that. And we're kind of unclear. Laura and I were just chatting. We're kind of unclear. Can those people that couldn't hear the video, can you hear me now as well? If you could throw that out in the chat.
Okay. And
Were
there
there
were subtitles, so I think we're okay on this
Were most
one.
people able to hear it? Yes? Okay. All right. Yeah,
Okay.
why don't you? Yeah, because I just checked my settings and everything looks okay.
So we're still unaware for those folks that weren't hearing the video what was going on, whether that's an internet issue or whether that's an issue with something that we can control in Zoom. So I just wanted to, interrupt you. Given that it was the first video, we want to make
Yeah,
sure.
and we're going to have a couple more. So, well, maybe like one more, maybe two. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll see. Well, we can send them out in the chat also. That's a YouTube video off of the internet. Okay.
Let's see how it goes from here.
Okay, awesome. All right, so we're going to start with section 1, trauma and IFS. Our chapters are going to be complex PTSD and IFS, various types of trauma, IFS, permanent healing of emotional wounds, and then integrating IFS into your treatment approach. Complex trauma is what we're seeing so much of. One of the issues that have been coming up and with the advanced training that I've been teaching at is that our clients are so much more complex than they used to be. Especially when we're talking about things like dissociation. We're seeing more dissociation than we've ever seen. Depersonalization, which is a type of dissociation, is like the third most prevalent symptom out there next to anxiety and depression. And so as our clients are getting more complex, we need to figure out what our tools are going to look like. I think one of the things that I really loved about Frank's video, because I've been hearing him say this for a long time, he got trained in a lot of things, sensory motor, he got trained in EMDR. And then when he found internal family systems, he was like, oh my goodness, right? I, of course, have a big heart connected to EMDR, but I think that what internal family systems did for me was kind of the same thing. It's the higher self that we really don't have access to in maybe other orientations. The higher self that can be bigger than just us, right? It involves energies from all over, and everybody's got different ways to define that. Also, the other thing about IFS that really spoke to me are going to be working with those exiles. The exiles are the wounded children, the very young parts. And the very young parts all they hold things, they hold burdens, but I'll just use language we're familiar with. They hold shame. There's a lot of shame. And I work with a ton of shame because I'm an addictions counselor. And the beautiful thing in the language that IFS uses, and I think it's amazing, is that shame does not belong to you, and we're going to give it back at some point. That the weight of what was put on us or put on our clients when they were young because of dysfunctional family systems or because of attachment ruptures, that's not ours. That's such a powerful statement because somebody put that on us and we're going to give it back. And then once we give it back, it's going to free up all this space that we can start creating and really embracing our authentic self. And Gabermonte does an amazing job of talking about that. So complex trauma in its most basic form is a relational violation. So that attachment, we need an attachment in order for our brains to develop, right? There's a certain specific need that we don't get when there's a rupture. And when it's when the trust is disrupted and the safety is disrupted, there's limited access to our self-energy. So the self-energy is there, but we have to get to it. And there's layers and layers and layers of different parts that are going to be getting in the way of the self-energy, because at the end of the day, all protector parts come out of fear. So the more fear that your client experiences, the more parts they're going to have. And the more parts they have, the harder it is to get to what we want to get to, which is going to be the child parts and the self-energy. Healing relational trauma puts us back in touch with our natural core and permits us to love and connect again with others. There's just something so beautiful about that. We get lost in our trauma work. I know that, a lot of my clients, I get very triggered. One of the things that Frank Andersen said was that when he went in and did internal family systems for himself, that for the most part, and I think he did say all of the work that he did was how he reacts with his clients. But let's just in case he didn't say all of it, the majority of work that he did was his reaction, what was going on for his parts when his clients were in the room. I think that it's amazing with internal family systems, at least the journey that I'm on, that it's almost required that you get an IFS therapist. It's required to get an IFS therapist, and it's also highly recommended that you're in these groups where you are the therapist and you are the client. And I've been doing a lot of work with many different orientations that have been wonderful. I'm part of a advanced training that has practicums where we learn about our parts. But this particular course that you take when they are like asking you to go out and start working on doing this yourself, that's really powerful. Because at the end of the day, if we're going to be working with our clients and using an orientation around complex trauma, we want to make sure we know what we're doing. And the only way that is by experiencing it ourselves as clients and as therapists and observers. Rebecca Case kind of summed it up in one statement. Safety is ultimately our intervention. And that is, remember, all protector parts evolve out of fear. So safety is what we need. we spend a lot of time in the early phases of or stage 1 of our trauma-informed care, because we're trying to help the client feel secure in their space and safe enough for their parts to come out and start doing the work. And so what does that look like? Well, the first thing it looks like is, let's figure out why the therapist or the client isn't safe. And who are you going to ask? Of course, you're going to ask the client's parts, because everybody's different and everybody has a different type of secure space. We do what's called secure your space with our clients, where we literally have them take a moment in time. And we're going to be talking about this in the polyvagal book, but a moment in time and try to figure out what makes it secure for them. You know, is it their favorite water bottle? Is it their favorite coffee cup? Is it their phone? Is there tattoos on their body? Is there jewelry on them? Do they wear their favorite, you know, flannel shirts? What is it that helps a client feel secure? And that security is really what we're looking for, so that then our client will be able to come out and share what they need to share in order to heal. I remember when I did a secure your space in my office, and somebody had noticed there was a bullet hole in the main window when you walked in. And I was like, what? Anyway, it's interesting to know what our clients are picking up on and what danger is out there and how their neuroception is working. And who better to ask than a part, right? Because the parts know. They know exactly what's going on. They're very, very tied into polyvagal. So Gabermonte, who basically support, like I think he did the intro of this book. Maybe he didn't do the intro, but he highly recommended it. Oh, he's on the cover. He comes from a space where everything is trauma related. In this video, it's a very short video, and I have it on my website if you need it. But this short video is all about how our clients, how everybody has to focus on that attachment first. That we can't engage in our authentic self. We can't figure out who we are because we're too busy protecting ourselves. We're too busy in service of survival. So whatever that looks like, whatever that family system looks like, whatever the trauma looks like, you know, complex trauma at the end of the day is being in an environment when you're young that's inescapable and there's no safety. And so if it's inescapable and there's no safety, day after day after month after month after month, then that client is, when they're young, when they're a child, they're developing all those parts, and it's energy, neurons that fire together, wire together, the parts that are being created to protect the client. So if I have a client that lies a lot, and I can pretty much guarantee that that client needed to lie when they were young in order to protect themselves. So looking at parts from a trauma perspective is really fascinating, because everything is going to revolve around the trauma that the client experienced. And we'll be talking about the difference between complex trauma and PTSD, because that's another kind of a messy thing in this country. But Gabermonte does a beautiful job of talking about how if you have to focus on safety and security, you have absolutely no opportunity to figure out how you are. In fact, you have to sacrifice that. So here we go.
When a child is born, the child has two needs. The first need is for attachment. And attachment is contact, connection, love. Without that, the human child does not survive. Any mammalian child or even an avian child doesn't survive. So that as soon as you get past the level of reptiles, the reptile is hatched, the mother's long gone by then, and the reptile infant either lives or dies, but there's no attachment to a parenting figure. As soon as you get to the level of birds now, the baby bird has to have an attachment with the parents. The parents have to be attached to the baby. Otherwise, the infant simply does not survive. Mammalians even more so, and most so the human, because we're the least developed, the least mature, with the least developed brains, and the most dependent for the longest period of time of any creature in the universe. So our attachment needs are enormous, and they remain important throughout lifetime because we have to have attachments to form societies, social groups, without which we don't survive. So attachment is a huge need. We have to connect, belong, be loved by, and love. That's just a basic human need. But we have another need as well, which is for authenticity. Authenticity is the capacity, as I said earlier, to know what we feel, to be in touch with our bodies, and to be able to express who we are and manifest who we are in our activities and in our relationships. Now, why is that? Well, think of a human being in the evolutionary period who's not in touch with their body and their gut feelings. How long do they survive out there in the wild? So authenticity is another huge survival need. Great. So far, so good. But what happens to a child where the attachment need is not compatible with the need for authenticity? In other words, if I'm authentic, my parents will reject me. If I feel what I feel and express what I feel and insist on my own truth, my parents can't handle it. And parents convey those messages unconsciously all the time. Not because they mean to, not because they don't love the child, not because they're not trying to do their best, but because they themselves are suppressed or traumatized or hurt or stressed. So I convey that message many times to my children, believe me, without any conscious desire to do so. In fact, it was the very opposite of what I wished to convey. But that they're not acceptable the way they are, with their emotions the way they are, that's the message my kids got when they were small. And most children get that in our society. Now, what does a child do with that? Well, if I give up my attachment for the sake of authenticity, I lose my relationships on which my life depends. Therefore, there's no question. What becomes suppressed is our authenticity, our emotions. And then we become 25 and 30 or 35, 40, and we don't know who we are. And somebody asks us, what do you feel? You say, I have no idea. And how many times we've all had the experience of having an inkling of a strong gut feeling, but we're ignoring it. We're ignoring it and we get into trouble. Well, that tells us what happened. What happened was that at some point we found out it was too costly for our attachment relationships to be in touch. So then it becomes not our first nature, but our second nature, to suppress our feelings, to lose touch with ourselves, and to suppress our gut feelings. And then we pay the cost later on in the form of addictions, mental illness, or any range of physical illnesses. But it all began with this tragic conflict that children should never be confronted with, but are all the time, between authenticity on the one hand and attachment on the other. And even as adults, so many people are suffering because they want to be themselves, but they're afraid to be because they know, or at least they fear, that if they're themselves, they're going to lose important attachment relationships in their life.
So dramatic. I think Gabor Mate's work is amazing. Once again, looking at this from a parts perspective, all of the protector parts that, once again, evolve out of fear, evolve out of childhood, and we're talking about complex trauma. So we are going to be assuming that childhood had inescapable chronic activities where the client had nowhere to go, no one to trust, nobody to keep them safe. And so in one of the books that I read for my trauma certification, it said something like, they didn't have time. They were so focused on surviving that there was no time, there was no energy that they could put toward figuring out who they are. And if kids try to figure out who they are, especially depending on what the family system looks like, that's just not supported. Then, we also have a country of shame. That's how we parent our kids, is with shame. So we've got a lot going on there. Our involvement in this profession is likely influenced by our own personal trauma histories. Frank makes a statement. He's like, we're not in this just to hear the stories. We're here because we have our own stories. He's so funny. Making it almost inevitable that trauma reenactments will occur between our clients and ourselves. And it's true. And so it's going to be really important that we're able to track not only our own, our clients' trauma stories, but that we're going to be tracking our own trauma stories. And we're going to get into chapters in the book where Frank literally will say, if your client's in a sympathetic fight, flight, freeze, you're going to, you want to use a certain, It's compassion. And he's going to tell us the difference between compassion and empathy. And if your client is in a dorsal vagal shutdown, then you're going to want to use empathy. And at the end of the day, the difference between empathy and compassion is empathy engages parts and compassion engages self. So there's language for all of this. So it's very exciting because, of course, our clients are going to be in the sympathetic nervous system or they're going to be in the dorsal vagal shutdown. And we're going to be able to talk about all of that. We're going to be able to learn about that and actually be given some really helpful tips as to how we meet our clients. Complication examples, conflicts with the therapeutic relationship, triggering of therapist parts, presence of extreme reactions and symptoms in clients, reenactments of early attachment wounds, and struggles with boundaries related to issues. I mean, you can be too rigid with your boundaries because you're not wanting to let the client cross our boundaries. And then we can also be very loose with boundaries. I know the type of therapist that I was, is I thought that if I did went above and beyond for my clients, if I let them go over by 10 minutes or I let them call me on the weekend, that I was actually helping them. And it wasn't that way at all. I'm not enforcing boundaries, and my clients didn't have boundaries growing up. Complex trauma is about not having any boundaries. And so it's really important for us to be very consistent and to know what our policies are. When I do consultation and I hear a therapist say they got emails all weekend, and that's a part. I'll say, is that your policy? What is your policy? Is the policy that we bring the email to the session, or are you supposed to read the email? Yeah, Laura.
When it's a good time, I just wanted to share a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing that really stood out to me with IFS is to be able to look at what we've always called like resistance a little bit differently and look at that as protection. And that has shifted so much in my work because I was in community mental health and overwhelmed with all of these clients that are inconsistent in coming to appointments. Like sometimes they would yell and stomp out of sessions for reasons I didn't yet understand. And the inconsistency, it can really get to us as clinicians. And to this shift to look at that as resistance, as like, what are they protecting and why? Like, what's coming up from their parts? And what are they needing to be different, or what are they looking for here? Like, made a huge difference. And then with IFS, it also gives us the tools to notice our own parts when we get hooked and like pulled into that and pulled into this like this standoff with their protective part that might not feel safe or comfortable with us and is coming at us in a way that's pushing us away and making it clear. We have a way to notice our parts and back off of that and create more space. So I love the way that this modality gives us those tools, which I didn't quite have yet with other approaches. So I just wanted to throw that out there, Paula.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. It's really helps us show up differently. And once again, I think that that's one of the things that Frank gets really excited about is how much it changed him as a clinician, just knowing what was going on for him when his clients, were expressing themselves in different ways. So that totally makes sense. Anything else, Laura?
What we might do if we have, do we have a little bit of time?
Yeah,
or how much?
we do.
Okay. So I'd love to hear from some of you, and if you want to post it in the chat, that would be great. But I wonder like how you relate to this concept of protection and resistance and how complex trauma adds that complexity. So I'm curious if you could notice protective parts in your clients and post some of those in the chat or speak it into the room if you'd like. I know we all have these similar experiences. I'm just curious to hear from some of you.
Hey, I'm Yvonne. I notice frequently I have a client who's pretty dissociative who will very frequently answer, I don't know, in session like 4 rapid times before answering a question. And like she will eventually answer it, but the first reaction is always, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Why are you asking that? And then she'll answer it and I'll be like, ooh, there's something there. There's a lot there around not wanting being used to like answers to questions specifically with therapists leading to consequences for her family. And so I'm like, totally understand.
Thank you for that. That's so relatable, the I don't know part.
Yeah,
We've
and I
got
do love the fact that there's an I don't know part. I remember when I don't know meant get the heck away from me. And so it was used at home a lot. And so then I knew when I was pushing boundaries, because when the client said, I don't know, I knew exactly what that meant. So that's a perfect example.
we've got some good stuff in the chat too. The always having to be right part,
Oh, right.
falling asleep, angry toward, calming part, critical, perfectionist, inner critic, the fix it part, sarcasm. Yeah. So agreeable parts, kind of people pleasing, apologetic. I already know this part. Yeah. You all are familiar.
Nice. Nice. It's cool that you can look at it from a perspective of how am I responding? How is my client responding? And then what does that look like between the two? It's all, like you said, it's all energy.
Yeah, dissociative parts. So then one more if you all are okay with it. But post in the chat or speak into the room like therapist parts that come up for you if you're comfortable. Sandy says, good client part. I bet that's for the last one. All right. Tara, the need to fix it for my fix it. Yep. Time checking part. Angry at their perpetrator part. Yeah, but protective of clients who are hurt, need to fix it. Nurturing parts. I'm so tired part. Yes.
I'll get defensive really easily. My clients. Yeah.
Eric, I'm better than fall apart. Frustrated. Yeah, I get a defensive part too if a client is saying something that comes across as criticism or not caring. Definitely feel that come up and have to do a U-turn there. Sassy, snarky, cool mom therapist part. Yeah. So, well, thank you all so much for sharing this. So that it's so fun to see where you're at and that you're noticing and using all of this already. It's great.
Excellent. Okay. So internal family systems assists in freeing parts from their extreme roles and healing the division and separation between parts and the self that trauma has caused. So when you think about a family that's been traumatized, we're coming from a family systems perspective. At the end of the day, we're going to be looking at reducing the intensity of what the parts are holding and then engaging and encouraging the healing so that the energy is a positive energy as opposed to a negative energy. Parts are then able to reinstate trust in the self-leadership and kindly integrate back into the whole system. So once again, looking at that self part, that higher self, that core self, that leadership self, whatever you want to call it, everybody gets to work with it in any way they want. But this self shows up and it's there, and it's about creating that self to part relationship, that self to part energy. And we'll get more into this, but Frank says sometimes we have to be the self for the client, that the client doesn't have the prefrontal cortex abilities. And so, you guys will start, this will make sense to you, but if a client can't unblend and you have to do direct access, we are the self as the therapist, and we're mentoring and we're showing the client how they can show up for that part. And so that, once again, that self is just super cool. IFS incorporates spirituality and promotes a humane, non-pathologizing, open-hearted, and loving approach to heal the pain associated with repeat relational violations. And so, yes, once again, it just has this really nice, inviting approach to it. I think Schwartz not only worked with eating disorders, but also he worked in the prisons. And I want to say, I'm blanking on the group that he worked with, but with trauma, parts or aspects of our personality that take on extreme protective roles or hold and carry painful experiences. So once again, with trauma, when we're thinking about trauma, we're going to define trauma in a minute. We're slowly getting there. That these parts, they can mimic or copy, for the most part, every perpetrator or a parent imitator part. If you have a dad that yells at you all the time, you're going to have a part of you that can yell also. You're going to have a part of you that can think like dad, because at the end of the day, we need to be able to navigate safety with certain people in our families growing up, hence what complex trauma is. And so our parts are going to be able to copy or mimic what those, like, for example, those parents were like. And then our ultimate goal is wanting to harmonize the family system. And that's true. It's just about creating peace and an understanding. Agree to disagree. Definitely. It's not about everybody, all parts being on the same page with different topics, but it's definitely about compromise, which is how relationships work to begin with. The IFS model is rooted in family systems theory and the multiplicity of the mind. I think the most powerful example for me, when I think of family systems, I think of Bowen family systems. That was early in my work. And I think of triangles, right? I always thinking of a triangle because when I was doing couples therapy or I had a parent come in, there was this, it was uneven. It was always the two had the energy and one didn't. And I think when internal family systems said, when you have a manager and a firefighter part, like, so let's use drinking, because I'm a addictions counselor. If I have a part that wants to drink and a part that doesn't want to drink, if I side with either one of those, I've just ousted one. And so that works beautifully. There are a lot of Bowen family system rules or theories that come into play here that we can just integrate right into the parts work that we're doing. Internal family systems believes that all individuals have what is called self, our core, soul, and internal leader, which doesn't need to be cultivated or developed. And I just think that's amazing. It's just always there. There's something really beautiful about that. And then we are born with the core, soul, and internal leader known as self. So a little bit about self, and you're going to hear a lot of things being repeated here because I think that's how we learn, by hearing things in different ways. And so when we're thinking about self is associated with the 8 C's. And then this is just something I use in my advanced trainings. It's just bright and beautiful, and it really speaks to what we're looking at when we think about self. But internal family systems goal is to welcome all parts, acknowledge all parts, appreciate and accept all parts, and to build trust with these 8 core aspects of self. And there's great language out there on how to engage these parts or the self with parts and increase that energy. Core self is like an artichoke. As you unblend, unburden, and honor one part at a time, you will eventually get to the heart. And so once again, thinking about those 8 C's, it's just nice direction. I put a 8C picture behind me on the wall, and I just love it because I can always just point up and just say, is there anything coming up for you from any of these C words? Because at the end of the day, we want our client to just start noticing that they can be naturally curious, or they can be make natural connections. And so it's just a great map for us. So glossary of terms. Frank's got a couple of pages of terms here. And I threw some up here. I just thought that we could start looking at them. I did this with our polyvagal as well. This is the language that we hear a lot, kind of being thrown around in different trainings. And I just thought it would be kind of cool if you picked one word and just kind of threw in like a sentence of what you think it is or what you learned. Because I always like to hear, there's a lot of different teachers out there. And so I just love to hear what it is that comes up for you. When you think of blended, or you think of unburdening, or you think of the 5 Ps. So Laura, let me know what comes up.
Right. So Jessica's starting off with a do-over, change to a happier ending.
Nice.
Blended, different parts are enmeshed and the person has a hard time seeing them as separate.
Mm-hmm.
Blended clients means reactive. Yeah. Or blended could be enmeshed.
Right.
Witnessing as the capacity to take space from part and witness their experience.
Wait, which one was that?
Witnessing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Devin's got it. I'm always asking a client when they are triggered, how old did you feel at that time? And then talk about the part of them that feels that age. Nice.
Mm-hmm.
And then integration could be integration of the adult and child.
Mm-hmm.
But it can also be integrating changes made in therapy.
Yep.
So firefighters are extreme parts. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Need lots of kindness and gentleness. Yes. And I love retrieval, to go back and find the part where it began and bring it to the present.
Nice.
So wherever the part got burdened.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me feel like a rescue mission. There we go with our rescuer parts. The firefighter whose hose is out of control and spraying water everywhere.
Nice.
Perhaps not even on the fire itself. I love it. Yeah, manager means controlling. Firefighters are on guard all the time.
Nice.
I love witnessing because each part can witness itself for others, can be witnessed to itself for others. Polarization as vacillating between two contradictory thoughts. So.
That's what I was going to ask. What about polarization? Yes. Good. Yeah. All right. And like I said, do you have anything else, Laura?
I think that's it. It's a lot of good stuff, though.
It's a lot of good stuff. And at the end of the day, like I said, we're just going to be bringing this into the work that we're doing with Frank's book in different ways so that we can just increase our learning. I just brought in, I had the 6 Fs, here are the 6 Fs, the 8 Cs, the 6 Fs, the 5 Ps. The Ps are about how to show up as a therapist, but we honored the 8 Cs. And so I just thought I'd bring the 6 Fs here. And Frank will be going into the details with how this works as we get into the book. But once again, I just pulled this slide from my other training. So the 6 Fs being find the part, which part is it that would like to be worked with today, or the part that's showing up, focusing on it, and then fleshing it out and looking at how we feel toward. I think that's another powerful piece. How you feel toward a part, as opposed to, I used to say, well, how's that part feeling? Feeling toward, that was language I really had to wrap my brain around. Befriending the part, and then once again, that fear. What is it protecting? Because at the end of the day, all protector parts evolve out of fear. So what was that fear that they started with? And you think about the child, the exiled part, and then you think about the layers and layers and layers and layers of protectors on there. And how do you get to that fear? They always say with IFS, the more you reveal, the more you heal, the more you reveal, because there's just more layers, kind of like that artichoke. I want to go quickly into the neurobiology before we jump into a little bit more. We're going to do the complex trauma piece in a minute. But at the end of the day, what are parts? And in the neurobiology, Frank's got a really complicated neurobiology chapter that I'm looking forward to. Really, I can't say half the words in it, but I'm really looking forward to it because there's some great learning. But I just want you to know that out there in the parts world, there's a lot of language. So there's ego states, there's parts, there's self states. They're going to be the IFS states. There's structural dissociation. They call their parts apparently normal parts and emotional parts. And you have transactional analysis, where you have adult parts and nurturing parts and childlike parts. And so parts. And then ISSTD came out and said they're going to call everything self states. So just know it's all the same thing, right? It's all the same thing. It's just a different way to look at it. And at the end of the day, what are these? They are bundles of neural connections that hold consistent patterns of information. So these are literally neurons that fire together, wire together. And so this is showing like early in life where, let's say you're in an alcoholic home and you're told you're worthless, and then you're still being told you're worthless, and you go to kindergarten and then you're bullied, and then you end up going through high school and you can't keep up with your grades and you're feeling more worthless, and then you end up an adult getting married or in a family where you're not respected by anybody and you're feeling worthless. At the end of the day, these are neuronal patterns, and these neurons that fire and wire, they're just condensed bundles, and that's what a part is. So these bundles are specific developmental ages. So is it something that happened when you were 5, or is it something that happened when you're 25? And that's why when we're asking how old is the part, we're trying to figure out, like, when did it originate? These bundles of energy are also known as parts, ego states, self states, alters, introjects. So just like I said, just know that it's all the same language. And when you're coming out of, let's say, some type of trauma-informed learning, you pick, do you want to do internal family systems, or do you want to do ego states? It's like I said, the language is just different. So the definition of parts. So once again, here's our neurons that fire together, wire together. And so I put a head and some arms on it so you could get the idea. And it's like, what do I need to survive? My fear is creating protector parts. So no matter what the fear is that the client's experiencing, they have parts after parts after parts that are evolving around what it is that the client needs to do in order to manage the attachment ruptures that they're experiencing. So, and the example with the client that lied a lot when they were young, and let's say they had to lie so that they didn't get hit, the system, the neurons that fire together, wire together, know lying, safety, lying, safety. That's the connection. It's all energies. There's no language per se where they get to talk to each other. Really good chance that client will lie as an adult, and we are there to create language so that the client can understand what their experience is. And so, like I said, if we're looking at safety, that helps with the shame, that helps with all kinds of things. The Ebb's axiom tells us that the repetition of transactions over and over develops thousands of thick, strong neuronal connections, negative and positive. So remember, when we say that it takes one person to make a difference in a client's life, that's because you are creating their original positive neural networks. Okay, because once again, neural networks are only neurons that fire together, wire together, and that's what we're looking at here. I took this from one of my trainings because we talk about neural networks. And so this basically is showing us how this client was shamed as a child, was shamed as they grew up. I believe this is, feeling worthless. And then they kept getting shamed. This goes in chronological order. And that this is going to be a really strong part when they're an adult. It's going to be something that they've experienced their whole life. And so what was the fear? Where did this originate? Because that's what our goal is. And then here's a positive, because positives are also, positive neural networks are something that we want to figure out and keep an eye on as well, because the positive neural networks are going to be what balances out and helps with the transformational change. So this is just a cute video. I know a lot of you have seen it because I play it all the time. It's super short, but it's just parts where they're all meeting at a table and Susan needs to make a decision. This is actually a commercial for Zillow, and just super cute. Just wanted to Or, yeah, here we go. Or not. Yeah, I might have a internet issue. Okay, I don't think we're gonna be able to play this. Bummer. So cute. I'll try it one more time.
Okay, listen up. Selling our place, buying this place. Thoughts? Negative me. No. Shouldn't have started with you. Spontaneous me. Already ordering drapes. Paranoid me. Why are you asking me? Antisocial me. Wow, I'm rude. Lazy me. Lazy me. We gotta sell our place, sort out finances. Stressed me. Wow, okay. Does anybody have anything helpful? Helpful me. Hi, we don't need to stress about lining it all up. Zillow can help with that. And that's why you're my favorite me. I thought I was your favorite me. Oh, you totally are. Gullible me. 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 Me.
Did you say something to me?
I didn't say anything.
Huh.
I just love that
Me.
it was a Super Bowl commercial and that they were focusing on parts. I just thought that was classic. Okay, so we're moving into the various types of trauma. This is a big piece because the treatment plans are going to be different. So when it comes to working with internal family systems, what Frank is going to be focusing on specifically is going to be more of the trauma down here. So let's go through this. So acute stress disorder usually resolves within the first month. Acute stress disorder and PTSD, we know that our EMDR is one of the tools, CBT, trauma, or what is it? Trauma, see, this is where my CBT, what is it? Laura, what is it? The trauma one. There are two types of
trauma focused CBT.
Trauma focused. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Trauma focused CBT and EMDR are what the World Health Organization recommends. And so that's going to be for PTSD. The acute disorder, it's going to be assumed that it works itself out. But if it doesn't, then we are going to have symptoms that are specific to PTSD. Those specific symptoms are going to be flashbacks. They're going to be hypervigilance. There's going to be maybe some amnesia. And the thing about a PTSD is it's a one-time Criterion A event. It's one natural disaster. It's interesting to me when they say one pandemic, but one situation, robbed at gunpoint, et cetera, et cetera. But as you move into these three latter ones, now we're talking about relational and complex PTSD. So repeated interpersonal violation with no escape. You're going to have PTSD symptoms from here, but you're also going to have dissociation. You're going to have negative beliefs and somatic distress. It becomes a whole different game. And so one of the things we teach in the EMDR training is that when you have PTSD and when you have complex PTSD, the treatment plans are different. And so, the great thing about Frank's book here is he's going to be focusing specifically on complex and then some going into the developmental trauma. So complex, looking at the DES, NOS, this is going to be coming from relational or attachment ruptures. This is going to be something that was repeated over and over and over again. So we're not talking about a client that comes in that, was at the 4th of July parade, for example. We're going to be talking about a client that comes in that had years and years of trauma as a child, and then maybe also went to the parade. We have a continuum of trauma that goes down into the extreme or dissociative trauma. Dissociative identity disorder will be dealt with separately. It's different. So this book is not going to be talking about DID, but like I said, it is going to be working with these complex PTSD cases. And so once again, I get super excited when I can tie this into EMDR, but the research for EMDR is PTSD. And then what blocks EMDR is going to be the parts that are coming out of complex PTSD. And so here we have an orientation that's perfect for assisting us when we get blocked, because the blocking happens all the time. And if you are an EMDR therapist, the language blocking belief, that's what that is. It's a part coming in and saying, we're not doing this. Yeah. So a couple notes on the rest of this chapter. It's kind of a mess because we've got, in this country, we have a PTSD diagnosis, and then we have a PTSD with a dissociative subtype. If you leave our country and go into where the World Health Organization is, then they have a complex trauma diagnosis. I think the takeaway here is that we're going to be focusing, this book focuses on the disorder of extreme stress, which is DES-NOS. And that's going to be between the DID diagnosis, which is completely dissociative, and a PTSD diagnosis. So I know it does sound confusing, but just know PTSD is a one-time event, and complex PTSD is going to be a relational attachment rupture that happened over and over and over again. And that's what we're focusing on in this book. And there's not a lot of literature out there when you take orientations and focus specifically on complex trauma. I threw this in here. This is a diagnostic that some of us use for DES-NOS. And I just wanted to show you over here on this chart. Here's a DID client, which is going to be, this is like maybe, I'm guessing here, 125, let's say, DID clients. This is going to be the yellow. But then here is the OSDD, which is DES-NOS. It's going to be the green. And so you can see here that when it comes to these symptoms down here, that these clients are going to be not as severe as a DID client. These are the clients we're focusing on in this book. So another example here would be, here's the DES-NOS right here, and then the yellow is the DID. We're not doing DID clients, and if you don't know what DID clients is, that's okay. And we are focusing on the complex trauma. And then just know that down here is the PTSD. And so when you're looking at it from a visual, you actually can see the difference. The cool thing about this is that the blue is your client. So this client was really high in some of the categories. This is memory problems, and this is, but at the end of the day, this is all going to be part of the parts work because it's going to be what parts are showing up. And with complex trauma, how dissociative are they? So we've got three main parts that we're going to be looking at. We've got the exiles, managers, and firefighters. I don't think that surprises anybody. The exiles are going to be the wounded children. They're wounded, or those that carry the pain. They're young, they're sensitive, they're vulnerable aspects of the personality. They're forced to carry the hurt, the pain, the sense of betrayal, the sadness, the loneliness, the shame, the neglect, the lack of love as it relates to a painful, difficult moments in their lives. So the exiles are our goal. When we are looking at a belief system and we're trying to identify what a negative belief is for a client, we're literally going back and looking at what was going on for that exile and what was the fear. Because the fear that the exile held is basically what then produced the managers and the firefighters. That's why they call them protector parts, because they're there to protect the exile. You have two different types of protector parts. You've got the managers, or the preventative parts that focus on the future. So managers are always about what's going to happen, what's the worst case scenario, how do I make sure that everything's okay. And then we have the firefighters, or the extreme parts, that focus on immediate problem solving in the present. Usually very impulsive, whereas a manager would be more around planning. What are the strengths of each of you? Getting to know these parts, the three main parts: exiles. That was then wounded child, part of the past, open-hearted and vulnerable. Once again, think about complex trauma. These parts came out of some pretty horrific stuff. And then the layers of the protector part start to get created. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Neurons that fire together, wire together. And we'll have the managers, which are the future part that is preventative and keeps exiled parts suppressed. They're enablers to avoid emotional pain. And then they're the firefighters. This is now extreme reactive part to solve a problem today. And I think Frank shifts the language, and he doesn't use the language firefighter. He uses extreme reactive part. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. These are just examples. Here's your 8 C's for yourself, right? And then here's going to be the exiles. And all of this engagement is going to be around the attachment figure. It's going to be around the betrayal trauma or the developmental trauma. And when we talk about complex trauma, once again, we're talking about something that happened over and over and over again, where there was no way to escape. There was no way out. There was no one that you could trust. And then with that fear is where the protectors come in. And the protectors are either going to be the manager that proactively prevents us from feeling pain, or the firefighters, which are reactive strategies. So we have proactive strategies that think forward, and we have reactive strategies that generally do something pretty spontaneous in the moment. And so that makes sense. And a lot of times the managers and the firefighters are polarized. Like, so once again, with the drinking part, my manager is going to say, you can't drink anymore. You've got 2 DUIs. And my firefighter is going to say, you know, screw you. I'm going to do what I want. So it's the polarization between the two. And our goal, right? They're both in service of honoring and keep protecting the exile. The goal is to get that true self in there to help kind of parent these parts in an appropriate way, in a nurturing way. So because these parts did not get that growing up. Protector parts goals are to move from attachment to authenticity. So that's Gabramonte's video. We're looking to go from attachment, which was a survival strategy, to what is authentic for that client. I get so many clients that come in, they're like, I don't even know who I am. And I want to say, and maybe I do say this in some way, shape, or form, I'll say, well, actually who you are is what you had to do to survive your trauma, your complex trauma. Once again, that trauma that happened in childhood. Protectors, there's no longer stress, so the protectors do not have to protect. That's the goal. And protectors are asked to soften back, and we focus on one part at a time, and we can offer them a chair, or we can offer them a chair. So when we think of just that cute video, right, that was a lot of parts all engaged at once. Our goal is to work with one part at a time. And sometimes we do what we call a meeting place, where there'll be several parts, but the attention is usually, the energy is between 2. These parts will insist on their roles to protect an exile and stay on curiosity and avoid a parts war. So that's going to be the goal of us, the therapist, and the client's higher self part. Protectors is a response to. How do they help? What's at risk? How do you make a protector part feel just 5% better? It's a great way for us to kind of get some language around what this protector part would maybe appreciate or enjoy. It helps soften them up. And then welcoming, acknowledging, appreciating, and trusting. That's our ultimate goal. Protectors have hearts, and when they have less to do, it is easier to work within them. So they have room for more insight. If your energy was freed up, what would you want to do instead? Get them to dream. So literally getting the protector on board, and Frank's going to be talking about this more in detail as we go throughout the chapters. So this information we just got, is it coming from the same part as before? If protectors block the work, they are your best friends. They are saying there is not enough self-energy. So when I think about doing trauma work, and we have our stages of trauma work, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and we can't get to stage 2, which is the memory work, it's because a part comes in and says, oh, no, we're not ready to go there. We're not ready to go there at all. Thinking that our protectors are managers and firefighters, our managers are young. After planning, always planning ahead and for the future. Client gets a solid sense of confidence, satisfaction, and pride from managers led accomplishments ahead of time for any situation that could result in pain. So once again, thinking toward that future. Promotes progress and personal success. Present with perfectionism to prove that we have worth. If asked, do you want a break? We'll say yes, but we'll not believe it. So at some point, that's our goal, is to give these parts a break. I love that you should is a manager, because we hear you should a lot. And so that's easy. That's kind of an easy way to identify a managing part. Firefighters, are you kidding me? Reactive. They decrease shame. That's what they're doing when they're protecting, even though then there's shame that can come out of what they do. Does not care about consequences. There is a firefighter hierarchy. Firefighters are about now. They're impulsive. They want to solve the problem in this minute. They don't think. When you think about prefrontal cortex and limbic system, the firefighters come from the fight, flight, freeze. They are on, they're about problem solving, whereas a manager part's going to think about it and go more into the prefrontal cortex. If our worthless gets triggered, then medicating. Firefighters love to medicate. And then cutting off, we appreciate it for when it has what it's been doing and relieve the emotional pain. You know, cutting off is an example would be like a client that has to go into a 12-step program and stop drinking. You're cutting it off. And that can end up creating a lot of problems. And then usually shamed by internal managers or external environment. So I'm just going to pick a couple of these. The exiles. Shame is implanted in an exile. Polarities. Remember, we've got the two different parts that are in conflict with each other. Are protectors of exiles. Exiles are pushed to the corner of the psyche. What does the exile need? Or what does it tell us? Is there more? You have been carrying shame for so long. Validate and normalize it and inviting titration. The exiles are hard to get to, but when you do get to them, the healing is absolutely amazing. The managers or preventative parts focus on the future, which is one thing that we had already said. Preventative parts run day-to-day life and are hardworking and often exhausted. They don't get credit they deserve. So the managers usually are the ones that are keeping everybody's life together. They're the planners, they're the perfectionists, they're the go-getters, the to-do list. Rarely get a break and love taking medication in search of relief. And managers have a hard time unblending because they run the show. And then the exiles, I kind of feel like we're just doubling up on these, but Frank thinks exiles mostly live in implicit memory and that flashbacks are wounded parts sharing fragments of what they're holding through one of the five senses. So when we look at our trauma and we look at the aspects of trauma like flashbacks, looking at amnesia, looking at different parts, managers, exiles, managers and firefighters that are coming in, they're going to look different because of the trauma. And so it's going to be trauma focused. So once again, the exiles mostly live in implicit memory and flashbacks are wounded parts, sharing fragments. And then once again, firefighters, extreme circumstances can be very triggering for a therapist. one of the things that Frank talks about is how he was triggered over and over again by his clients, and how a lot of his work was very specific to how he was responding to his clients. I think that just a little while ago, I'd shared that my biggest, my part that comes out that gets me in trouble a lot is becoming defensive. If a therapist says they're annoyed with me, I immediately want to go into why I'm annoyed with them. And that's not helpful. I don't, but that's what the part wants to do. So it's cool because I can work with that part then later. Why am I feeling defensive with a client? And then chapter 4, integrating IFS into the treatment approach. Most trauma models are experiential therapies working with body and emotions, where relationships are central. And so that's going to be what we're working on here internally, the relationships between the parts. And you always want to make sure that you have permission of the parts. There are going to be parts as we get into more and more complex trauma that are not going to be okay with us going to memory work, for example. When we're working with complex trauma, we're going to be asking more so than we've ever done before about getting the parts permission. Checking inside and see if the client's parts are willing to separate and make sure all their parts agree. So once again, going in, getting permission, talking about what this is going to look like, and making sure that the parts are on board. And one of the biggest the issues that we've got with EMDR right now, the two main reasons why EMDR doesn't work, one is because the target's too big, but the second one is because of blocking beliefs. We are seeing so many blocking beliefs by protector parts, and it's getting in the way because we are seeing more complex trauma than we've ever seen before. So it's definitely very refreshing to know that we've got a way to work with these parts, because being able to have several different trauma orientations just gives you more tools to work with. Neuroplasticity holds that every time a network fires, it strengthens and heals. So neurons that fire together, wire together. So it doesn't matter if it's positive, it doesn't matter if it's negative. And so thinking about how these parts come about, they come about from some type of childhood experience. Once again, we're looking at complex trauma. I'm going to be reminding you over and over and over again. Complex trauma is going to be that rupture of attachment. It's going to be that inescapable betrayal trauma, developmental trauma, lack of trust, where a client experienced as a child something that was terrifying over and over and over again. And that really has us hold the space in a different way. We want a mindful separation to support the necessary distance, perspective, and environment. So a mindful separation, in that there's a lot of ways to work on the space that you're going to create between parts. And so that's a big piece of the training. The therapist-client relationship is crucial, providing the safety needed for wounded parts to heal in vulnerability in the process of healing for trauma. So that therapist, we are going to represent the self. We are going to represent the prefrontal cortex of the client, and we may need to lend our prefrontal cortex. If you have a client that needs direct access, it's because they don't have enough of their own self energy. So the relationship's going to be crucial because we, the therapists, are going to be mentoring for the client and teaching them how their self can show up for their clients. So, of course, with 4 minutes, any thoughts? You want to either put them out in the chat. The first couple chapters are just us getting our feet wet.
We did have like some comments in the chat just about this being really useful learning, and a couple of people needing to hop off early for clients.
Sure, absolutely. Yep. Okay. All right, great.
Paula,
What's
Paula,
that?
we had Roxana join us too. midstream. So just so you know, Roxana's here as well.
Hey, Roxana. Okay.
Hi.
All right. So we have 2 months before our next group because I am taking my higher self, core self, leadership self on a pilgrimage. So that is all awesome. So we've got lots of time to read the next chapters. It's going to get more intense. The language is going to pick up. And I'll just be pulling in some of the basics that we talked about today. I will keep pulling it into, especially the complex trauma piece, because that's my specialty as we move through the book. Laura, anything final?
I don't think so. The schedule ended up being kind of lengthy. So if you have a chance to pull that out of the chat, like that's going to be your document that tells us what we're reading and when the meetings are, what the link is if you lose your registration link. So I'm going to post that again. And then we're meeting on 10/21, same time, same place, same link. So if you all registered for this, you should be registered for that. And we're excited to see you back in a couple of months.
Laura, can I ask Paula a really quick question about something she got, Paula?
Go for it, Leah.
This is amazing. So thank you so much. Paula, you were talking about Bowen before and triangulation, and I got my training before your EMDR was on Bowen, so I'm really interested in the connection there. And I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about how you would use yourself.
It was such a powerful moment because I do a lot of addiction work. So you've got the part that wants to drink, the part that doesn't want to drink, which is going to be the manager, right? And the manager's like, you can't drink, you have 2 DUIs. And then here I am, the therapist, and I'm siding with the manager. So that's our triangle in Bowen's family system. It means that the drinking part is booted out of the energy, and we don't want that. And that just spoke volumes to me, because that is part of Bowen family systems, is we need to figure out how to get the 2 engaged, right? And I need to step out of it.
And so what was your intervention then? How did you step out of it?
Getting the 2 parts to honor each other. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And we'll be working. We'll talk more about that as Frank gets into the book more.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, you guys. Thank you. Thank you for being okay with my, I woke up with a temperature this morning, and so I'm all good, but I just not as much energy as I usually have. So you guys all have a good one. We'll see you in 2 months. And I'm just super excited about this book. So I really appreciate you being on this journey.
Right. Thank you all so much for coming.